Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily, part 53 today. Might be a slightly shorter one or a weirder one today as I get back into the rhythm. We didn't do one for the past 3-4 days. I have still been making content. I think there's like 7 hours of stream stuff, but the past few days I keep getting distracted away from this show. The comments that I've actually picked here and the footage I have, I gathered days ago, so this is going to be kind of weird. Usually when I read your messages, I have like something very prominent in the front of my mind that I know is like a key point I want to talk about. And then, you know, it's re-prompted when I read the message out when it gets to recording, maybe an hour later tops. Now it's been days and I have no idea whether I'll have any takes at all. So we'll just see what happens. And we're going to be on a variety of lore topics. I want to talk about a new elite specialization by the end of today as well. Did I lead us into a new topic about that yet? But we'll talk about that at the end. So let's run on in. First, we've got William Hawkins. I hope you guys have been good the past couple of days, by the way. Who says, the Order of Whispers were founded to fight Palawa Joko and then to fight the Elder Dragons. With both gone, what happens to them? Maybe unifying Vabi under a ruler and serving them like the Shining Blade do for Kryta? The Demon Priory can keep on exploring ruins and uncovering, preserving history. I actually do think that both the Order of Whispers and the Demon Priory have a ton of reason to exist, completely disconnected from the dragons. So if we're talking about End of Dragons and we're at the end of the expansion, or maybe even the final act of the expansion, who knows? Particularly the season following, what might happen with these people? Yes, the Demon Priory can just keep learning things. Whispers, though, you got to remember, yes, they kind of were founded in the fallout of the Palawa Joko stuff, but Palawa Joko was sealed away for hundreds of years. He was effectively gone for an insane length of time, a period of time during which the Order of Whispers continued to operate. And I think they'd have lots to do. There's a kind of a subtle difference between Guild Wars 1's Order of Whispers and Guild Wars 2's Order of Whispers. And I don't just mean that, you know, they're in a new chantry in a different area of the world and all that kind of stuff. But like the Guild Wars 1 Order of Whispers felt more like demon hunters than they felt like assassins and spies and sneaks, while the Guild Wars 2 side really pushed kind of the stealth angle a bit more. And I guess that's because it kind of juxtaposed better with the Vigil, who were much more about courage and upfront bravery and all that kind of stuff, and the Demon Priory that were more about intellect and knowledge and preparing. Maybe there's a bit of crossover between the new Order of Whispers with their spy stuff and the Demon Priory, you know, that emphasis on intelligence collection. So I think that once we move beyond the End of Dragons, if the devs still want to do lots of fun stuff with these orders, I'm actually really excited about the Order of Whispers above all. And it's not just because of the Order of Shadows thing. In fact, here, look, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to play you the audio. You guys might remember this from POF, of the Order of Shadows in that lore book. Listen to this. This is how sneaky and weird those guys are. Right, so there's this idea that maybe the Order of Shadows will contaminate things, maybe become antagonists or something out in the future, and maybe this has a little something to do with that book we found in Cormyr's library and so on. But the Order of Whispers themselves, I think, can do a lot of stuff if the story moves into a place where it's about, like, fighting crazy ancient entities from the mists, rather than things on Tyria. You know, the definitive thing I think about the Elder Dragons right now is they're kind of like a primal Tyrian force. They're Tyrian based. And maybe if we're going to look into stories beyond that, we are going to go to the Mist more and talk more about demons and stuff of that nature. The Order of Whispers can come forward in that kind of more classic Guild Wars 1 feel. Also, somebody mentioned this to me the other day. I can't find the exact dev quote, but apparently it was said in the super early days of Guild Wars 2's development, the base concepts they had before they even landed on Elder Dragons was the idea of doing stories about angels and demons. And so you might see that they still have some ideas about that. Maybe that ties into all this new lore we got about Zoteka last year. Who knows? That being the Utopia setting. Next, we got this quite a long comment here from Tanner. I only have a small thing to really pick out here, but they say, whoa. The idea that the previous races couldn't kill the Elder Dragons, but we can, just because we're the protagonists, seems logical. But the whole point of the Zaitan campaign was to show that the dragons can only be killed through teamwork. Well, your opening sentence there, you're comparing, like, a narrative discussion and a writer's room discussion with in-canon explanations. it's obviously not an in-universe idea that we win because we're the protagonist. Like, that's nuts. No. There is obviously this idea that we're winning because of teamwork. Trahan's idea to form the pact worked because the 3 orders and unaffiliated members of the 5 playable races, however many lesser races, work together. The Priory itself made use of knowledge of the dragons obtained by the previous races. The previous generation of sapient races failed because they didn't work together. They were unified in their realization that the Elder Dragons were bad, but divided in their attempts to defeat them. And then the Masat noped out. The only reason we were able to beat Kralkatorrik is because Aureen exists, solely because blah blah. We already talked about a lot of this. It reminds me of Mass Effect 3. Listen, I think you're really doing a discredit to the full breadth of the story here, because we have very little information about the previous rise, the previous cycle. But the idea is that those previous 5 major races, right? And we can assume there were lesser races back then as well. But those 5 races did everything they could and they couldn't win. The idea that just these people never teamed up is like nonsense. We have a slight suggestion about a Mersat betrayal in as much of them going to the Mists, and then the little story we got with the Ember Bay release. We've had a little bit on that, but it's still supposed to be a massive, vibrant, moving, dynamic, deep world in the previous rise. Like, I think people think way too shallowly about the previous rise. Like, you mentioned this idea, we use the information from the previous rise. Well, the previous rise would have been able to use information from the previous rise. It's not Tyria was created, one rise of Elder Dragons, and then us. The idea is that there's been loads of cycles, and they've all failed. And yeah, we have limited information, but if this is supposed to feel like a big, authentic, realistic fantasy world, you have to give the credit that probably they did team up, and not in no small part. They did have massive sieges. They did have big ideas. And it is, when you're dealing with this idea of like something that has come back multiple times over 10,000 year scales, and entire groups of societies are wiped out, like, you have to believe that there's a lot of complexity that went in with that. And many of the advantages we have today, they also have. You know, so I do think it is a little bit of a wriggle in the story. I don't think it's we unlocked the power of friendship, and none of these other massive diverse civilizations throughout all of history ever realized that friendship was the answer. Like, come on. Like, these are the things that I don't like thinking about Guild Wars, because it makes the whole world seem really small and really artificial, and I'd rather move away from that. So I would rather have a much more compelling reason as to why. And I do agree that they've given enough depth to the glint aspect of all of this, leading into Aureen, and then Aureen can be the catch-all. I do agree that they've done enough there, but I think really all of it hinges on Glint being telepathic, and therefore empathizing with the free peoples of Tyria and rebelling against her master. And also she's prophetic at the same time. And that's it, right? And that helped her do Glint's legacy. We're kind of pinning it all on that fact about Glint, and we're basically saying that has never happened on any other previous cycle. And I think in a perfect world, I'm not saying that the story has a duty to do this anymore, but I think in a perfect world, ArenaNet could have divulged more on the very origins of Glint and how she ended up prophetic as a seer, and like how it all kind of worked together to create this really extraordinary position. I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen that happen over the years is because obviously that takes the special focus away from the commander and puts it on another character. And ArenaNet are doing this thing like where it's, you know, which a lot of fantasy does, and maybe this is the right thing to do, where basically you are the special superhero and everything has to revolve around you to a large degree, and it has to feel like your efforts, otherwise people aren't interested or something, I don't know. But yeah, interesting discussions for sure about the previous cycle, and I just think the more we learn about them, the more we could have interesting talks going further. Next, we got Reaper, who says, I think Aureen's potential death would be a rather hard thing to do, mostly due to Joko magic, so it would be closer to sealing away somewhere temporarily, most likely stabbing something in her heart. She did mention brand in heart, hard to mend in War Eternal. Well, hold on. The idea of Aureen's death, as you put in quotes, is that we're not thinking about her as a character anymore. We're thinking of her as an entity which contains a great deal of magic. And the idea is that that magic is distributed away from her. And that would mean the Joko-ness, the lichness, the ability to come back from the dead is sapped away from her, either willingly or whatever. And so now she is, so to speak, mortal once again. The whole Aureen coming back to life thing as well is really interesting, how the devs tied it to all the Ascension ideas. But yeah, I don't think there is any kind of plot hole there that she would lose the lichiness as much as she would lose her ability to, you know, do whatever else with all of her powerful magics. Next, we've got JR, who says the lack of exposition has been a problem in the game since release. I love the franchise, but one of the biggest problems with the game is that there are vast areas of the world that don't really draw you in or feel important in any way. One way they could have remedied this would have been with inserting static quests. I know they always wanted to pull away from this idea because they wanted to reinvent the MMO wheel, but when I look back at Guild Wars 1 and see just how much story and detail they crammed into their static quests, I actually lament the decision to remove them quite a lot. They had a chance to change their minds on this early on, but they decided to go the living world route instead, permanently changing environments on the fly, and I think this choice alone has really crippled the exposition options for the game. Now it's too far gone to introduce them, and they've had to implement side quests in weird ways that utilize the collection's achievements instead. I can only hope that they do move to a Guild Wars 3, that they really reconsider their stance on static quest content. Well, look, I agree that after End of Dragons, if End of Dragons ends with a cliffhanger for a Guild Wars 3 type thing, I agree that this is one of the things that they can find a best of both worlds example on. But I do think you're kind of wrong about a lot of little things here. I don't think Living World Season 1 is what ruined their ability to deliver a lot of exposition per patch. And I don't think either that it was at that moment that they weren't allowed to do traditional quests anymore. I do think that they really kind of didn't believe in that format. That's why dynamic events are there. And I do think it was a very deliberate decision never to do something like that. And then they ended up doing it kind of wonkily through collections. But I really think it was the day that they started messing with collections as much as they do that we kind of lost out a lot. And really, one of the biggest problems I actually have with that, I think the collections are actually pretty good as quest stands-ins, particularly now. Maybe back in the day, not so much, but you do get a lot of text and you do get a lot of objectives, and it is pretty well laid out. The only big downside I see is for very casual players, it can be really hard to get invested in that stuff because it's kind of bundled in with a million other things that aren't quests. They are just general achievements, and maybe you've made the decision you don't like those, and maybe you've made the decision that you don't like achievement points, and there's a ton of people in that camp, by the way. Or maybe you're just ignorant to the idea in the first place, and now you miss out on what is quality questing. I do think there are quality quests as collections, but they're obscure and they're a little bit buried, and it's not hitting as many people. There's not as much clarity as if you had a full-on traditional quest system. I do agree with that. However, I want to say as well, I don't think it's even necessary. I really don't. And I don't think Guild Wars 1's a great example. I mean, Guild Wars 1's quests were a good example of not doing the traditional MMO quests. Because we're not in a binary world right now where it's like traditional MMO quests or dynamic events and collections. We're not in that world. There is a middle ground where you do traditional quests, but they're not crap. And that's basically how Guild Wars 1 operated. People don't really recognize this or talk about this much, but there were very, very, very few quests in the first game structured like other MMOs quests, where they would say kill 10 rats or go collect 50 bear asses or whatever. They didn't do that much. There is a couple of examples of that. But because of Guild Wars 1's ability to have instances, they did it like a lot more escorts and a lot more like sieges and basically stuff that feel like dynamic events. But they did them as traditional quests, and they weren't grindy and they weren't tedious and they weren't clear just time gates, right? And I think ArenaNet did it very well. They were already innovating back with the original game. And I think that, you know, a new product that did quests like that would be a good idea. And it's still not the big problem with exposition. Like, if you actually go back and say, look at Prophecies. Prophecies actually doesn't have that many traditional quests, guys. It does at the start. Pre-searing has a billion of them. And there's a good amount in post-searing Ascalon, a few around the Northern Shiver Peaks. But it quickly drops off, like madly. And it only gets propped up later with after-release updates like Sorrow's Furnace and so on. Which is maybe where some of the Living World comparisons can come in. But I think people, like, over-represent just how much world building there was in Prophecies. There wasn't that much, and it certainly wasn't done that much through traditional quests, and most people playing it were just skipping these walls of text, and they weren't that interested in it. It's a weird thing where I think right as Guild Wars 2 was being made, ArenaNet had this big impression that players didn't care much about the world and the story, so don't give them the walls of text. And now in the subsequent decade, I kind of feel like that's reversed. I probably have a very serious bias for that. As someone who engages with the story a lot and as a community who's really caught on with the story, I'm probably quite biased in this way. But I feel like people do care more about MMO story, and not just MMO, just RPG or even gaming stories and worlds, way more than they did during the 2000s. During the 2000s, almost nobody gave a damn. ArenaNet kind of operated off of that, building the dynamic events and trying to voice act everything and all that. I think if they were moving forward, if they were reinventing the wheel, whether that's in a new game or not, the main thing they just need to do is be comfortable going back to walls of text. I really like the idea of a more expansive dialogue system where you kind of like have a keyword style approach, like say you see in some of the early Bethesda games, like if you guys have ever played Morrowind, where you'll speak to an NPC, they basically chunk a couple of paragraphs at you, and there'll be a couple of keywords you can ask them about as subjects. I think really that's where they're limited the most. The commander doesn't really get to express themselves much in the non-voice acted world because you only get one tiny little sentence of a response. Those are actually the areas I think that they could go to give us a deeper feel and pad out the releases, explore the subject material a lot more. I think it's the dialogue windows that we have and how that UI is structured in Guild Wars 2 that has held it back more than traditional quests, more than anything else. We actually did a big discussion about this on a recent stream and what they could do with voice acting in the future. One idea somebody had, which I really like, to cut down on the budget and the number of people they need for all the different races and all the genders and all the localization, is maybe you can have like the main character's voice be selectable from just like 3. Like you've got the gruff guy, you've got the posh guy, you've got the charming guy, and then you've got like 3 equivalents for female, and that's it. And those voices are always the same, even across race, which sounds a bit rubbish, but then you realize they can add tons of new races after that point because it doesn't exponentially build on the voice acting budget and the number of people you got to get in, and you avoid a ton of problems that Guild Wars 2 currently has. So there's a lot of fun ways they can do it and get a lot more dialogue in there. To me, it's the dialogue system, not questing. Next, Brian says, I'm 100% convinced that Ergos is another pale tree, like the mother of the Sylvari is. And if it's not, someone dropped the ball. Back when you could kill him in Guild Wars 1, they talk about how fundamental he is to Echoval, that he'd eventually recover. I don't remember them saying he'd eventually recover. Hopefully without the murderous rage he had when we killed him, or / defeated, I guess would be the right way of putting that. I'm really hoping the Guild Wars story or following Living World season brings Ergos back with a vengeance, an antagonist that we, over the course of the story, both defeat then ally with when we show him the recovery of the forest and introduce him to his sibling on Neath up north. Actually, that'd be really cool. Imagine if Ergos was a pale tree, not Morgemoth, but whomever preceded him. Yeah, I love the idea of what planty dragon, so to speak, came before Morgemoth, if they have like lineages similar to how the Kralkatoric line has lineages. The devs haven't really expressly said that about any of the other dragons for what it's worth, except this suggestion that Jormag and Primordus are twinned, so and she uses like the word brother a lot about him, so maybe that is some kind of actual dragon family, or that could just be purely metaphorical use of language. We don't really know. But yeah, I like the idea of Ergos. I'm not that confident that they'll do it really in the X-Pack. It feels to me like Ergos might get the Realm of Torment treatment that Path of Fire had. You know, where like there's some representation that it was there, but they don't do much. I'm really scared that End of Dragons has too many stories going on. And if they do this stuff, I'd really like to see it after the X-Pack in Living World. I think it's more appropriate there. There is, of course, Ergos' equivalent. Your lore justification for it as well, that it's some kind of, like, version of the avatar of the Pale Tree that gets corrupted by the Jade Wind and gets pissed off. Like, I kind of like that idea. But the other side of this as well, his equivalent in the other elite mission, Canaxai. Again, it's like, does Canaxai really have a role to play? Do the outcasts and the sickness and the madness have a role to play? Well, yes, if they tie that to the dragon madness, that would be very clever, especially considering right here toward the end of Champions, they have Aureen talking about the madness again. So maybe if the madness is a big plot in End of Dragons, they can look at the outcasts going crazy in the Oni and tie it all together. That would be quite cool, and very clever if they manage to do it in a satisfying way. I've just realized I've done that thing where I sort of glossed over an old story without explaining for new viewers. The idea of the Outcast is a story where, while on the Jade Sea, several of the Luxons were going mad and, rebelling and fighting against you. And the idea was if they dug too deep down, they caught this sickness, this madness, and There was a story in which you go down to discover what happened, and you realize deep below the Jade, there's an area that seems to blend into some kind of like nightmare world. It seems to be an area of Tyria that's very close to the mists, and there's a demon down there called Canaxai, and it was kind of him that was causing this madness. It was also Canaxai that was causing these other demons called Oni, these assassins that would teleport around and ambush you. He was causing them to appear as well. So yeah, we just got this idea of this entity from the mist that was causing people to go crazy as they dug too deep. And it's madness as just a premise. Might be interesting to tie into the whole dragon madness story that we're now currently dealing with. I could see the devs do it and make it work. But on the other hand, I think they might just leave him alone. Leave him until you want to do some kind of big demon story, as I alluded to in my answer to a previous question here. Here it says, and here I am getting a Guild Wars 2 Icebrood Saga related advert for the latest chapter release. Nice. Yes, guys, I figured it out. I was being tagged with World of Warcraft on all these videos for like so long. I don't know why. It still will automatically do it. But if after upload I manually go in and I say, hey, it's Guild Wars 2, it seems to correctly tag the next couple of videos, and you start getting better adverts as well. I mean, presumably you guys are all already playing Icebrood Saga, so maybe it's a bad ad. But I'm happy that that's set up now. Another solution for me would have just been to have not tagged these videos as gaming videos at all. But I like actually being in the Guild Wars 2 section so people can browse to it and stuff. I'm going to do another poll as well, guys. Right, sometime after I launch this video, keep an eye out. I'm going to use the community section again because I'm particularly interested in, like, you guys, when you joined Guild Wars. Did you join during Prophecies, Factions, Nightfall, Eye of the North? Did you join during the core launch, Living World Season 1, Icebrood Saga, you know, Season 4? I'm really curious to see where the bulk of you are. Are the bulk of you now launch Guild Wars 2 rather than launch Guild Wars 1? I'm really fascinated by that, so keep an eye out and I'll try to post that. Well, I do have some more questions, guys, but I'll ease us back into this nice and gently. We'll stop here at 20 minutes. Thanks for all your messages. For the next big topic, okay, what I want to talk about is a new elite specialization, and the one I really have the least inspiration for, and I really don't know what I want to see, and that's Ranger. Seriously, I know I desperately want a new Ranger Elite spec that I'll have a lot of fun with in the open world. The other ones aren't clicking for me right now. But what the hell do you think that they can do for Ranger? And bonus points if you can make it well cantha themed. And try not to step on the toes of some of these other classes, maybe. Well, there you have it, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Sorry about the wait for the past couple of days. If you've not been watching the streams, obviously, it would have been feeling a little bit dead. And I do want to be prioritizing this, obviously. And I'll be back tomorrow. I've still got plans for lots of other videos. Until this PC gets here, I kind of feel like everything is, like, stalled, which sucks. But at least we get to check in with these each day. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care now.